Good evening, everyone. It is a Tuesday, and that means that this being the Bright Tuesday, so we meet every other week on a Tuesday, we are starting our Tuesday evening webinar. I'm Chrissi Kelly from AbScent, and I have with me this evening Professor Barry Smith, who is not only a very keen supporter of what we do, but he is also the director for the Center of the Study of the Senses at the Institute of Advanced Study at the University of London. So welcome, Barry. Thank you very much for joining us again. And I think maybe I'd like to throw in that, we've done a lot of webinars with you. You were a guest on my very first webinar. And I'd like to thank you for supporting AbScent so much in the last year and actually before that. So it's great to have you with us again. It's just Barry and me this evening. So we are going to be, I will be looking into the question and answer bar to see whether or not you've got anything that you'd like to ask us as we go along. We will get to questions at the end of the hour, but do put any questions that you get as they occur to you into the Q&A bar. We try and keep the chat separate, so do please make your posts in the Q&A bar. Right. Okay. So, Barry, one of the things that we know about smell loss is that it seems to have a profound effect on people's well-being. And I know this is a personal interest of yours. So why don't you give us your overview? I must say you're one of the few people I know who has a good sense of smell, who really seems to understand what's going on inside our heads. So I would like you to sort of give us your view of what might be going on.
Chrissi, thanks very much. It's very nice to be joining you and the people watching the webinar. I'm a great admirer of what AbScent is doing, and I hope in the discussions that we've had, we can go some way towards helping people, if not make their condition better, at least help them to think about it, understand it. And we have certainly got a lot of insight and help from people on the AbScent Facebook page and website, giving us real insights into smell loss and smell dysfunction. So I think the place to start is to say that I've always been struck by the fact that taste and smell are neglected senses, that when philosophers, psychologists, neuroscientists set out to describe how we take in information from the world and how we use that to navigate and to move around the world, we tend to get stories about vision and about hearing and about touch. And taste and smell are a sort of afterthought. And you will often hear psychologists, neuroscientists, and philosophers say, well, these are just subjective senses. You know, they're really just a matter of everybody having an individual experience when they're sniffing at a flower or when they're eating food. I've never been convinced of that, because I think we wouldn't have passed on recipes to one another. We wouldn't make perfumes that are successful. We wouldn't enjoy the smell of a garden and talk about it to one another if it was really so subjective. And I've always been struck by the fact that your sense of smell, rather than thinking it's something that's only happening when you sniff, and I think a lot of people, until they become acutely aware of the sense of smell, often through suddenly losing it, a lot of people think, I only smell when I sniff. It's only when I put my nose down to a flower or a glass of wine and have a sniff at it, that's when I have smell. Otherwise, smell just isn't going on. But we know that's not true. And the psychologist J.J. Gibson said, we smell because we breathe. As soon as you're taking molecules from your surroundings up into the nose, they are being processed by receptors. They're being fed through to the olfactory centers in the brain. And whether you're attending to them or whether you're consciously aware of them, that processing is still going on, and there's smelling taking place. And it also occurs to me that, you know, when I walk down the street or I enter a room and you can smell someone's perfume, instead of thinking again of smell as something entirely subjective and just going on in my brain or in my mind. I'm very aware of that scent as occupying the space between us, filling out the room in some way, filling out what's going on around me. And I think it's for that reason that a little bit of reflection, a little bit of thinking about how smell operates will bring you to the idea that smell is an incredibly important orientating sense. It's orientating you to your surroundings. It's making you either aware or at least affected by the odors that other people, their clothes, their bodies, their cooking, their wines and so on are giving off, their perfumes. And that therefore it is part of the senses we use to navigate, to move around the world and to sense what's out there and to be sort of acutely sensitive to what's out there, and especially to when things are changing out there. So I think another key point about our sense of smell is it's a sense which is very alert to sudden changes. If you suddenly smell the smell of smoke, you're alerted to it. If you come into your own home and you smell stale cigarette smoke, you think someone's been smoking in here. Or if you come into your home and there was a sort of slightly odd smell, you might think I've left the garbage out. So there's a way in which smell is there to fill out the space around you, but also to detect when things are changing or whether you should be alerted to them. So, now, given that that's how I think smell is normally operating, although not necessarily appreciated as operating in that way, the loss of it, I think, is profound, is really profound.
And as you know, when you were just talking now about how smell is what occupies the space between us. I love that image, that it's some sort of a kind of an invisible plasma that we're all floating in. And then if you have all that drained away, just as if you were swimming in a swimming pool and you were being buoyed up by all that water, and then suddenly it drains away, then really reality is quite different from what it used to be. So I really do like that image, because when the thing that is occupies the space between the two of us is gone, where does that leave me as the person without the sense of smell?
Yes, it leaves you feeling, I think, very cut off from your world. And that's I like your metaphor too. So if we're swimming in a swimming pool, we're aware of the water on our skin. We're feeling completely surrounded by it. We're enclosed by that water. It's a nice feeling. People like that. Imagine not that the water disappears, because then you couldn't move through the medium, but imagine your skin simply no longer gave you any information about it. You would suddenly feel as though you were very cut off from your surroundings. Right. There was no feel of the silky slipperiness of the water. And so what I think is happening when our sense of smell goes missing, when suddenly there's as we know through COVID, there's this sudden onset of anosmia, just no experience of smell. It's as profoundly affecting as sudden deafness or suddenly losing your sense of touch. And very recently, I was lucky enough to be taking a little bit of holiday in the summer, and I was swimming. And as people often have, I one ear filled with water, and it took a long time to clear. And as I was moving around the world, I was very aware of how the world seemed to shift for me by getting information only from one ear. Very disorientating. And here's the thing that's a surprise. You think, well, when I hear people talk, it's a little bit muffled or it's coming from one direction. But actually, having one ear blocked, I was terribly aware of the changes when I moved from one room to another. Because even though you don't think about it, You might think I'm in a very quiet house, nothing is stirring. Your ears are also taking in the acousmatics, the surrounding acoustics of the room. And just moving from one room to another, it feels different. And you're only aware of that, I think, when you lose that response from one ear. Suddenly you think, gosh, I'm terribly aware of things not being right. So it's not at all surprising to me. And it's sad to read the reports of how profoundly people are affected by the sudden loss of smell as part of their environment. But it's not surprising, because our senses are keenly operating to make us aware and in touch with everything around us in our immediate surroundings. And so strip some of that out, and you will just feel as though you're not really in contact with the world as you once were.
Absolutely. And I mean, no one watching this is going to dispute what you say. We're all in agreement. The question is, how do we take this, how do we explain to doctors, to researchers, to family members, to people who say, oh, well, you'll get over it. Or, as unfortunately doctors sometimes say, there's nothing we can do, so you'll just have to take up a hobby or something like that. How do we take this experience that we've been witnessing in the Facebook groups and on the other platforms that we have, and turn that into something that really catches the eye of the people who are trying to help us? How do we communicate that?
Yeah, how do you do it? So I think the reason why a lot of medics are, they don't mean to be, but maybe they're just sort of rather unmoved by the description you as a patient give of having lost your sense of smell, is because they've never experienced what it is to be without it. And it's quite hard to put into words what it is to be without it. It's hard to convey to somebody how profoundly affecting that is. But here we need to sort of reach for analogies where I think medics will get a sense of, oh yeah, I'm beginning to get that now. I mean, to have your ears completely blocked and sealed, to have no sound signals coming in at all, a medic would understand that was a very difficult experience to live with. So they tend to say to the patients who go and see them, can you see, can you hear, can you stand all right? Is your sense of balance okay? You haven't got sense of smell, don't worry about it, it's fine, it doesn't matter. And I think not only are they failing to understand that the sense of smell was part of filling out the world immediately around the perceiver, that perceivers fill out their space by the smell it has, as well as by how it looks and how it sounds. But here's something deeper than that. Loss of smell, and I've seen this in some of the Facebook reports, and Chrissi, you and I and some other colleagues, some clinicians and some psychologists have written research papers together, and with the permission of people on the Facebook group, we've used particular quotations, and almost everybody says, I feel as though I'm behind glass. I feel as though I'm cut off from the world. I hear that from people with anosmia who've contacted me directly. I see it in the Facebook group. But some people go even further. They say, I now feel alien in my own body, or I feel as though I'm not, I'm not myself. I'm somehow feeling almost as if everything is a little bit unreal, even for me in my body. Now that's a very sort of profound experience. And again, I think it's mirrored by other senses and what happens when they are completely eliminated. So a few years ago, when I was recording a radio program with my producer, David Edmonds, we were looking for a studio in the BBC, which is always sort of very hard, and you've got to sort of book and find time. And he said, this one's available. But it turned out to be a studio that nobody wanted to use because it was like an anechoic chamber. And an anechoic chamber is one in which there is no echo, there's no sound of being in there. So you walked into this room, and as the door closed, like a suction noise, there was no sound in the room. And even if you tapped your fingers on the desk, there was no sound.
Ooh.
And you feel as though this is unreal. You feel as though you might be unreal. You might now, in fact, a lot of people will describe it, and I had that horrible experience. You feel as though you might be dead because you're not making any impact on your environment, and it doesn't seem to be making any impact on you. And
Right.
eventually, the only way we could record in there was by the producer in the sound booth keeping his microphone open, so I could hear some sound of human voice and some sound of air.
Right.
It's a very, very spooky experience. So the sense of unreality, the sense of being out of touch so radically with the world that you feel it's a dreamlike experience or almost a deathly experience, comes from that sharp disconnection with things which are usually always present. And that means that, and I think this is worth stressing, that there's something that we often miss when we talk about the self, ourselves. We tend to think there's this sort of single thing. I just, close my eyes and I commune with my inner self, and it's just a single thing. But the sense of self that we have is actually an orchestration of lots of different sensory information about the outside world and how we're located in it, and information from our body, from our skin, from
Right.
our heart rate, from our respiration. And all of that, I think, has to be carefully orchestrated to give you a sense of self. And if you take some of these pieces away, the self seems fragmented.
Yep. So, Barry, I'd like to stop you right now because we've got such a wonderful quote, which comes from one of the Facebook groups, and is really beautifully illustrative of what you've just been talking about. So if you'll allow me to share this quote: "The world is very blank, or if not blank, shades of decay. I feel alien from myself. It's also kind of a loneliness in the world, like a part of me is missing, as I can no longer smell and experience the emotions of everyday basic living. Detached from normality, lonely in my body. It is so hard to explain." I think that's wonderful. And then another quote
Perfect. It's
in a similar
perfect.
vein: "I feel discombobulated, like I don't exist. I can't smell my house and feel at home. I can't smell fresh air or grass when I go out. I can't smell the rain. I would say I am mildly depressed about it, and I cry sometimes." I mean, that captures really well that feeling that you could pass from one kind of environment to another like a ghost, and
Yes.
not grasp any of it.
You,
So
you don't grasp any of it, but equally, and the quote brilliantly illustrates that, you feel as though a bit of yourself is missing. Not just the world around you being emptier, there's a bit of you missing, because the way you interact with the world, that barrier between inner and outer, which the senses constantly patrol, that's gone awry, and therefore there's a bit of you that the outside world was sort of partly contributing to, is taken away, and therefore there's a bit of you that seems missing.
and as I've often said in these talks and elsewhere, if I've been interviewed, is sometimes it feels like you're looking into a mirror and you're not seeing your reflection. There's nothing giving you feedback about you.
Yeah.
And it's that absence of the space between you and me. And I think that's very profound.
And and notice how we're finding lots of analogies with the other senses, like looking into a mirror and having nothing like an image reflected back, being in an anechoic chamber and hearing no vibration or sound given back to you, and being in a world without odor where there's nothing given back. But what's interesting is you can't, and maybe this is how it seemed for you, and I'm interested as to whether it's how it seems for many of the people who've been describing their condition to us, whether you can't seem to turn off the prediction that you will smell something, and that every time it's a disappointment, every time it's a loss.
I absolutely agree with that. You don't stop expecting those kind of messages.
Yeah.
And in the same way, you know, this just came up recently. Someone said, you know, I see something in the grocery store that looks appealing to me, and I take it home and I eat it, and I'm disappointed over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And that's just seems to be something that you can't quite believe, that when you bite into that, whatever it is, digestive biscuit, or I don't know what else, that it's going to be a disappointment. It's going to be something that feels alien to you.
Yeah, and if you think of it, we've you know lived quite a lot of our life having very strong expectations about how things will smell, and therefore taste, because of the contribution that smell makes to taste, by looking at pieces of fruit. And you know, the look of a ripe tomato, the look of an orange, a banana, you've got very firm expectations about what's coming next when you approach it, or you cut the skin, or you break into it. And it's as if we can't seem to turn those expectations off. There's some part of the hungry brain still waiting for that information. The information never comes, but therefore it leaves you with the sort of shock of the hollowness, the emptiness. And that's sort of profoundly affecting emotionally, from what I read from people talking about it. And it's trying to convey that, I think, to doctors, so that they see that there's nothing trivial about losing your sense of smell. It's very profoundly affecting sense.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I agree with you completely. There is nothing trivial about it. It may seem trivial to other people, but it is certainly not trivial to those of us who have experienced it. Right. I'd like to go on to another topic, which is very much something we've been discussing quite a bit recently, and this is the switch in valence, the what happens when things that you expect to be pleasant turn out to be so unpleasant, with if you've got parosmia, as we've just been describing. And similarly, the very sort of destabilizing experience of finding that body waste suddenly becomes not that unpleasant at all, and sometimes even surpasses the new smell of food, with some cocktail of aroma compounds that is really quite benign. And I wonder, it's so interesting because, for instance, well, one of the most responded to posts in the Facebook group was about the smell of poo. I can't remember now how many, but well over 500. This is a topic that just electrified people. Everybody had a story about it. Everybody had been embarrassed to say so. And people long for the smell of their own bodies. And that is, I think, also profound and quite poignant. You know, if we use that as a measure of how much we're missing this, you know, the world as it used to be, it says a lot to say that, you know, we miss these so-called bad smells so much.
Yes, there's something really puzzling about parosmia. So many people who lost the sense of smell and then had a brief window where things seemed to be normal. I'm very interested in that period. I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. And then they start to have distorted perceptions of familiar things. And really what's interesting is, if these were just distortions due to the newly regenerating receptors being wired in the wrong way, cross-wired, you know, so it's rather like nerve endings growing back and making their own path, then you would expect there would be distorted smells. But why would they be so unpleasant? Why would it be the case that, you know, why couldn't it be the case that an orange now smells like a rose, or or a violet, or why couldn't it be that a banana smells like pineapple? But instead, what people are discovering are particular foods, and this is, of course, the work that you and many of the Facebook group led as a topic with Jane Parker, a food scientist, food chemist from Reading, who looked at what the food groups were, and indeed she decided to dive deeper and try and find out what the molecules were. That people were having these disgust reactions to foods they liked. Coffee, lots of people were finding coffee absolutely disgusting by smell, and therefore, when they taste and get the aromas in their mouths as well. And the best description I've heard, and the one I always use when people say, well, what is parosmia like, is one member of the Facebook group talking about the smell of coffee and its taste as being like fruity sewage. Now, I think that's a good description, because that lets you know it's not that it just tastes a bit odd and you'll just get used to it. Who amongst us could think of trying to swallow something that tastes of fruity sewage or bin juice? Another very good description was like a harbor at low tide. When you've got the green slime on the side of the harbor walls. Very good descriptions, and tells you how repellent some of those smells are. So people are finding many of their familiar and favorite foods distorted: onions, garlic, eggs, roasted meats, coffee, and so on, chocolate. And yet this funny switch where their poo smells bad. And I always wanted to know, when I first heard people saying that, one or two people said it just sort of casually. And then, as you said, asking many people who were undergoing parosmia, is this happening to you? They said, yeah, oh, yes. It's
avalanche of response.
Yeah. And I've been calling this the fair is foul and foul is fair part of parosmia, that sort of hedonic switch around. So very distressing. And when you tell others who don't know what parosmia is that this is part of it, they realize how difficult this must be, because if your poo smells like food, and quite desirably, pleasant to smell, but your food smells like poo or worse, then this is just going to make the whole experience of eating nightmarish and really quite distressing. Why should it be like that? Who knows? But here are a couple of thoughts that are worth kind of thinking about. One thing is it that when your now decayed olfactory receptors regenerate, and we know that in normal times your olfactory receptors regenerate every 2 or 3 months anyway, but if they're regenerating, is it that they go back to factory settings? So is it that the first thing that you're alert to are those chemicals that, if they were in very high concentrations, would be toxic or just, extremely dangerous or unpleasant? So mercaptans, sulfur compounds, pyrazines that you find in those foods, and that, if they were very high, and usually they're in tiny small quantities, if they're in very high concentrations, maybe they would be environments you didn't want to be in and you'd go out from. And here's the other thing that a lot of people say when you tell them about poo. They say, well, children don't find their own poo disgusting to begin with. They have to learn that. In fact, a lot of parents have got to teach children not to play with poo and not to,
redecorate with it.
Redecorate with it, exactly. So is it that it's a kind of return to factory settings, a sort of early setting where you're on the qui vive looking for dangerous compounds, and at the same time you have to learn that this isn't pleasant? I don't know how to assess that, but then I think some of your Facebook group have said very interesting things, that their poo smells like food, so that they begin to feel they could detect the particular foods in the poo.
Absolutely.
As if they have become rather like those sophisticated chemical gadgets that Jane Parker uses in Reading, to do GCO and to take out the odors one by one and find out what's in there.
Even like wine critics, Barry.
Or wine critics who are sort of desperately trying to find out what it is they're smelling, right? But
I mean, as Jane would point out, coffee is such a unique food. in this, in this kind of study, because it has all of these highly active odor compounds that do pass through the system. So the reason why you like a cup of coffee, if you've got a healthy sense of smell, is because it's just bombarding you with all these really powerful and potent odor compounds. And by their very nature, they just pass out of the system.
Yes.
So you would actually, in a normal setting, you would get all those coffee smells coming with your waste. So whether it's poo or urine, I mean, we all know that if you drink too much coffee, your urine starts smelling like coffee. But of course, going along with that, there are other compounds like indole, scatol, and cresol, which for a person with a normal sense of smell, completely overwhelms the coffee smell. And that does not seem to be the case for people with parosmia. For whatever reason, those really powerful odors that are generally associated with poo are not perceived by parosmics. So let me go to another quote, which is I think a very nice illustration of this, and then we can discuss a bit more. So hold on. Mm-hmm. While I go on to the next one. Okay, then when I got the same poo smell from my coffee, hot toast, etc., it was vile. I'm not sure if it's because I now associate it with poo, or because your brain tells you that you shouldn't be eating things that don't smell right. Smells that make other people gag, like poo and farts, smell sweet, almost nice to me. This is regardless of if it is my own or other people's.
Now, that's a very useful piece of information, because one of the questions I had when I think you and others told me that people with parosmia were finding that their poo smelled actually quite nice and quite sweet, quite pleasant. I wondered, and how does other people's poo smell to them? Because I mean, and that's a good question, because scientifically we learned not to make a mistake in the case of urine and the smell of asparagus. So a lot of people, when they eat asparagus, very soon after, their urine smells of asparagus. And there were other people who said, no, my urine doesn't smell of asparagus at all. And we used to think, oh, well, it's a chemical reaction in the body. Some people produce the asparagus odors in the urine and others don't, until some clever clogs thought of taking a bag of non-asparagus smelling urine to people who said their urine did smell of asparagus and it smelled of asparagus.
Right.
So
right.
It's that some people don't smell that at all, and others do. But so we really needed to know, was this just your own, or was it across the board? And it turns out that yeah, other people's poo smells good too. So as you say, scatol, indole, cresol, these things seem to be either missing or extremely muted. But
or
then
eclipsed by these other ones. I don't know.
Or maybe eclipsed. And then, of course, when things smell disgusting, is it that the now distorted odors are eclipsing the usual ones, or are the usual ones missing, which usually mask or mute or tone down the things which we're now finding offensive? Or were those things never really offensive, but they've switched their hedonics? In fact, we simply don't know. There's a lot of work to be done still, and for this we need, the help of patients and Facebook group users and everybody else to contribute. Right. But one of the things that we should say is people find coffee disgusting. A lot of people reported chocolate as well, and then roasted meat. Now, these are either fermented or highly evolved processes in which new odors are produced. And of course, fermentation, as the chef David Chang says, it's when rotten goes right. We like fermented things. We're really letting them rot, and then they produce odors that we find appealing or attractive, even though there's a little tanginess in there and something, in sauerkraut that is definitely on the edge, but the rest of it's so delicious. So I wonder whether that slightly rotten element is what our noses in recovery are paying attention to or are on the lookout for.
Right.
And you have had that period where you weren't able to detect anything. So are you now looking for rotten things? But if that's true, we go back to poo. Why is it poo, which is, waste product? Why is that so nice?
I can pitch in with another interesting observation. Jane and I were very brave, and we used the GCO to help us pick apart the odor compounds in poo. So the University of Reading has access to a source for poo, which they use for other kinds of studies, believe it or not. And she and I both smelled the same sample. And I went, and for those of you who are in the audience and don't know exactly how this machine works, it takes the odor space above whatever it is that you're thinking about. So in this case, it would be a slurry of poo in a little test tube. And there's a wick that takes in some of this air. And then that wick is withdrawn from the test tube and put into a machine. And this machine draws apart this kind of odor cloud into all of its constituent molecules, from lightweight ones to heavy ones. And they come shooting out of something, there's like a little nose piece. And you sit there with a clock and a pen and a piece of paper. And then what you do is you watch the clock go along. And then as soon as you smell something, you take a note of the time, you write it down, and you try and describe as best you can what it is that you smelled. And so I went first, and I've found everything was just lovely. I mean, it was sort of toast and berries and buttery smells and just pleasant. I got one, and I can't remember exactly how I described it, but it was something to do with something on toast. And Jane did the same thing, sort of maybe later that day. And I mean, Jane was just, her eyes were streaming, she was gagging. It was that bad for her. So it's not as though I would find other people's poo offensive and only my own benign. I found everything as benign as, I found that sample as benign as my own. So yeah, there is really something going on.
There's something going on. I did talk to Jane after she had tested you, and she did say eye-watering, because she wondered whether the sample that you had been smelling was maybe an old sample, and that it just wasn't giving off the odors. And so she subjected herself to it. Eye-watering, she said. How could Chrissi have been able to bear that? So yeah, that was as clear as day. That was, by the way, a very, very brilliant description of the GCO, what it does and how we use it. I'm going to use that from now on. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
That was very useful.
That's just, it sounds like I know all these things sort of, but I pick them up, from people like you, from people like Jane, Simon, Deka, all these people that I talk to have increased my own knowledge. So if it sounded good, I think we need to give credit to Jane.
Yes, absolutely. And you, I think, as well, but there we are.
Thank you. Right, let me just remind you, we're now about 40 minutes in. We will be taking questions later on. So if you've got a question, pop it into the Q&A panel, and we would love to read it out and see if we can help you with that. Right, Barry, I think I'd like to bring up another topic now, which also strikes right at the heart of sense of self and those intimate connections that we have with other people.
Mm.
I know this is something that is really on people's minds a lot. It's not an easy subject to talk about. And I'm going to screen share again, if you'll just bear with me 1 second while I screen share. And this is about intimacy. So this person says, I am constantly washing and feeling bad. This makes me feel even less sexy for my husband, and I struggle at the best of times. I think he smells horrid too. It's really not the nicest thing to go through or even try and talk about. It's emotionally sucking life from me. It's affecting all aspects of my life now. Food, emotions, marriage. Psychologically, there's a lot of damage. And I feel less confident with my partner now. I don't know why I feel this way, but until I saw this thread, I didn't realize it could be connected. My partner doesn't smell the way he did. Two extremely powerful quotes there, Barry.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin with this subject?
Very, very powerful. And I think a reminder again of the role the sense of smell plays in our lives, because not only is it guiding food search and is it giving us an awareness of our immediate surroundings and what's occupying the space between us, but it's often used as a way of feeling at home, safe, intimate, and familiar with someone. You know their sense of smell. You know the sense of smell of those you're physically close to, and your partner will, even if you're not sort of actively sniffing them, your partner's body odor will be so familiar and so reassuring that perhaps just as you're settling down beside them to go to sleep, you've got that awareness of the person there. Now, if that has either gone or worse, in this case, is distorted, if it's a smell that you now find disgusting, that's a very difficult and elemental thing to try to get round or get over. It's not something that you can put aside or ignore.
Right.
It's also, I think, it's also changing the sense of who they are. And therefore, again, the sense of whether you feel familiar, reassured, open, comfortable with them. And what I notice in these two very dramatic quotes, which I think are tremendously well described and I think resonate with a lot of people's experience who've been undergoing parosmia, is that two things are going on. One, that your partner no longer smells the way they do, attractive, safe, reassuring, appealing. They're giving off an odor that is slightly repelling, but you're also worried. So the people in the writing these reports show you're worried about how you smell to them. You're worried about whether you smell bad or unpleasant. There are people who are congenitally anosmic. They've never had a sense of smell and maybe are diagnosed only, as teenagers. They realize they've no sense of smell, and they're puzzled as to what it is that other people are talking about. But they pretty quickly come to have an awareness that if they're not changing their clothes regularly enough, or if they're not bathing, that maybe their body odors will smell unpleasant to someone else. And quite often that creates a level of anxiety where people will be washing more frequently than others normally do, and continually asking, am I okay? Do I smell okay? And it's very hard, I think, to feel physically intimate and sort of sexually aroused and excited by someone if you've got those anxieties. So I think this really is going to interrupt people's sex lives. It's going to interrupt the ease. They're not going to feel vulnerable in a good way. They're going to feel anxious in a distressed way. And of course, it's already bad enough living with a distorted sense of smell or with absence of smell. But if the things that might have normally given you comfort and reassurance are now interrupted in this way, that's an even lonelier place to be. And again, a sense of how profound it is when we suffer smell dysfunction, and a reminder about the large role that smell plays in our everyday lives.
Right. I mean, I'd just like to add here that two things really. I mentioned earlier my analogy of the mirror. You lose your sense of smell, then it affects your sense of self. But in these examples that we've just described, the loss of smell has somehow changed the identity of the people that are most intimately connected to the person with smell loss. So it's not just yourself, but that's kind of like seeping out into your to your most intimate partners.
Yeah, you're losing self and other in this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to point out is that if, just imagine when you're kissing someone, you're probably breathing through your nose. And so that whole experience is also a very intimate smell experience.
Yes, many people have described their partner's breath as being disgusting, even though it isn't usually. And it's not that it might be more disgusting if they've recently been brushing their teeth, given that we know mint toothpaste is actually one of the triggers for the disgust response in parosmia.
Right. Yeah, that's yeah, okay. We've got one more quote that I think I'm going to squeeze in now.
Mm-hmm.
And let me just share my screen. Okay, and great. So this is on the subject of eating and pleasure, and also another one on people not understanding. Eating used to be a pleasure, something to look forward to. Now food is just sustenance, and there is no pleasure in eating. I stop as soon as I'm full. And with everything tasting bland, I find that I feel full very quickly. I find it extremely depressing. My relations with my family are strained, or that's how I perceive them anyway. My husband doesn't seem to understand how devastating it is to lose these senses, although he tries his best. I do believe that. Again, quite poignant. We've discussed quite a bit in a previous webinars about how this loss of the ability to eat changes everything, and not just makes it difficult to eat and therefore people lose weight, but also that beautiful experience of sitting down at a table with people that you love, and then that can't happen anymore.
Yes, I think so much of eating is sharing and eating together and eating with pleasure in the food. And if you taste something nice, you say, "Oh, try this; it's lovely." And it might be hard for relatives of people with anosmia to stop doing that, to say, "Oh, this is lovely," or this tastes or smells delicious, and then realizing that someone else can't share that. I think the thing that people have to try to work around is what other ways can they be interested in their food. There's nothing worse than trying to feed yourself when it's unpleasant or bland or boring, just for the need to take in nutrients. I mean, that it's almost as if you might as well be on a drip giving you those nutrients, because it's so unenjoyable. So how can people try to take pleasure in food? And I think that's where we look at how multisensory the experience of eating is, because it's always taste, touch, and smell. It's also stimulation of the trigeminal nerve that serves the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, that gives you those sensations of cooling or burning or stinging from spices. And of course, there are sensations of hot and cold. And quite often what the brain likes and enjoys is contrast. So, if people watching this program have been listening to anything on a cooking program recently on TV, or endless hours of MasterChef, they'll hear people saying, "And I added this for texture." And what do they mean? Well, they mean whatever they added creates a contrast in texture with what they have. So if something is kind of soft and slippery, they'll put something a little crisp or crackling in there, or they'll add something which is different from what the rest of the mouth is processing. So you have you add some crunchy vegetables when you've got some soft meats or fish there. So contrast is good. So think of texture as being one of the things that you can experiment with. Think of temperature as being another. Mixing hot and cold foods together, even if it's a piece of cold salmon with a hot boiled potato, new potato. I mean, those contrasting sensations will actually be interesting. And of course, many people who've lost their sense of smell and then report to doctors, I've lost my taste, haven't really lost their taste. If they put some salt on their tongue or some lemon juice or some sugar, they taste that. But they say it doesn't taste very strong, and that, you know, that's all I can taste.
Right.
But then you have to use, again, contrast, sweet and sour, sweet and salt, the sweet salt balance in baking, umami, the fifth taste, which is the savory meatiness of a mushroom that you fry without yet having salt on it, soy sauce. These are things that can just add a little more variety to the foods you're having. So I think for people with anosmia, it's trying to use the whole panoply of sensory contributions to what we call tasting, to try to add a little more, given the lack of the sense of smell, which was contributing so much. And then with people with parosmia, it really is about finding those foods which are, as people say, safe, that they don't have such a distorted perception of or a bad reaction to. And I know that people on the Facebook group were giving their responses to questionnaires about which foods trigger a bad response and which seems to be safe. And that when you've identified what the safe foods are, now the important thing is to make sure that you've got enough recipes with the safe ingredients so that food doesn't become boring and so that you get the right nutrition. And I worked with a couple of cooks, Ryan Riley and Kimberly Duke, who produced a free cookbook, which is called the Taste and Flavor Cookbook. And if you Google it, you'll find it easily and be able to download a copy of it. There are lots of ideas to try to make delicious, interesting meals, avoiding some of the most common triggers for parosmia. And I think again, that's a way of just making meal times more enjoyable, because the recipes that Ryan and Kim produce, and they're part of Life Kitchen, who were putting on classes for people undergoing chemotherapy for cancer treatment, and often had distorted or altered sense of smell and taste. They're trying to produce meals which the rest of your family could eat with you. It's not producing something bland to avoid, some of the worst excesses. It's trying to make sure you could all sit down and share a meal and all enjoy it. So I would definitely urge people to try that out. And if things don't work for you, or they're still problematic, please do let us know, because it's really just by working with people who are undergoing these conditions that we learn more and try to think of workarounds.
Right, thank you. Yes, and for anyone who would like to see that cookbook, it's available free as a PDF download. And what you have to do is Google Life Kitchen and then Taste and Flavor. That's the name of the book. So you can, it's a great little cookbook. It's got some beautiful photography in it that will also go a long way to giving you appetite. Now, Barry, while we're on this subject, talking about food, we've got one question here, only one question tonight. I have no doubt that 1 minute to the hour, people are going to be piling in with their questions, but Frank has sent us this question. So I think we can read this one out. He says, my wife has lost her smell except for her perfume. Well, she's very lucky. She has also lost her taste except for pickles, lemon, salt, lentil soup, but not fish, meat, pork, and chicken. So I think I'm hearing that the gustation might be in good shape, but perhaps not olfaction. She never had COVID, as the loss of smell started over 2 years ago, but the taste started this past February. We're starting the smell training today with essential oils. Is there anything else we can do?
Well, I think thanks for the question, Frank. And I think it's important to sort of mark here that your wife does have her sense of taste, because we often over-describe what our sense of taste provides. Our taste is really just everything the tongue can provide you with. And the tongue can provide you with experiences of salt, sweet, sour, bitter, or savory, umami. that's roughly it. So that's why you get the pickles and you get the lemon juice, you get the tangy things that are there, maybe the umami in the lentils. But the difference between pork and chicken and lamb and so on, those are not due to the tongue. Those are due to texture and to the sense of smell. You don't have chicken receptors on your tongue or lamb receptors. That's all coming from the familiar odors of those meats in the nose, and not smelling from the outside, but where the odors rise from the mouth when you're chewing and releasing those odor molecules. They're traveling up through the back of the throat to the receptors at the bridge of the nose, and that's what's giving you the flavor hit that we call tasting. And if you think of it, when you swallow, you're forcing, you're pulsing odors up to the nose, and that's when you get that satisfying feeling. I know how this tastes now. So do try smell training. Very important to try and see if it has an effect on increasing awareness or increasing sensitivity to certain odors and smells, and helps recover some of that sense. But also keep trying lots of combinations of sweet and sour and salt, and using a little bit of bitter here and there. And if it's too bitter, add some salt, which modifies bitterness. And then, just experiment around there and see if there are things that are still enjoyable to eat.
Yeah. And if I could just throw this in about smell training, which I'm an enthusiastic supporter of. Anyone who tries it out should know that it's not a quick fix. You have to do it religiously twice a day for a minimum of 4 months. And it works on along the same principles as stroke rehab, for instance. It's not something that happens because of the essential oils that you're smelling, if that's what you're smell training with, but rather it happens because of what your brain is trying to do with the exercise. So if you'd like to know more about smell training, we've got a lot of webinars on the subject in our YouTube channel. We also have all kinds of resources, including short videos, which are embedded into the pages of the website. So you can find that just by going to abscent.org. You can learn more there, either the easy way with short videos, or we've got, some written pieces that you can look at, including a download which will help you make your own smell training kit. So all that is available to you for free, so you can check that out. And hopefully, if you've had smell loss for more than about 3 weeks, you really should give this a try. Not a cure, but a supportive technique that will hasten your recovery. Right, thank you very much, Frank. It looks like nobody else was brave enough to ask us a question. So at this point, I think what I'll do is just remind you that I'm going to be back here in 2 weeks with another webinar. Do look out on social media for the information that we'll be giving you about that. It will be the same sign-up procedure as this time. So we're going over from the old click the Zoom link to something a little bit more organized. So thank you for following through on that and signing up today. I know it was a bit of a hurdle to get people in the door, but hopefully people will learn and it will be easier the next time. And other than that, I guess, Barry, thank you as always for a great evening. I think we've covered some really good topics, some important topics that probably don't get enough airtime because they are so sensitive. So thank you for helping us with that. And otherwise, AbScent is available to you on Facebook, on the AbScent network, which you will find signposted through the website, which is just abscent.org. And we are there for you, and we are happy to hear from you at any time. So do please join the conversation and talk with other people who are like you. This will help you on your way. So Barry, thank you very much. Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, to thank you very much for putting these webinars on, and I know that they've been sort of tremendously informative to people, and I'm very glad to be joining you, and thanks to everyone who has joined. And please do keep sending us information and descriptions of the conditions and any changes in conditions that you're going through, because that really is a stimulus to further research and to give further insights. And I think at the moment, working with with patients and patient advocacy groups, working with clinicians and working with scientists. There's a lot collectively we can all do together to try and see if we can figure some of these strange conditions out and hopefully lead to progress in making it better and easier for people to manage them. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Barry. Thanks to everyone in the audience. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Good night.
Bye.